I just want everybody to know that I'm getting really tired of hard lessons. The last two lessons on Sunday morning have been difficult and hard to preach, and I'm sure hard to listen to. And last Wednesday night and the Wednesday night before that, the material was hard. It just doesn't get any better tonight. But I will tell you Sunday morning, the way it's looking Sunday morning, it's going to be short, it's going to be easy, and it might even be fun, okay? So Sunday morning is safe to come. Does anybody remember what we were talking about last week?
Honoring leaders.
Honoring leaders. It says in verse 13 of chapter 2, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king or to the governors, it says. Look at verse, I think that says 18. Slaves, submit yourselves to masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. And in chapter 3, verse 1, wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands. The only one of the three I like is the last. It's the only one I can kind of understand and process. But we had difficulty last week talking about submission. And I remember back in the book of Romans, we got to chapter 13, I spent about 3 lessons or so on submission, and we talked about how easy it is to submit when authority is working for our good, but when authority is obviously not working for our good, how difficult it is to submit. Now, someone brought up, and rightfully so, that there are times, even in Scripture, when people did not submit to the authority. Can you think of any of those times? All right, the book of Acts is one where Peter and John are told, don't preach ever again in the name of Jesus, and they respond by saying what?
We can't help.
Now, which is right, to obey God or to obey man? You said Daniel, and Daniel was told by the authority, whom he had been very respectful to, and an authority who really liked him most of the time, but he was told not to pray, and
Hebrew midwives.
and he prayed. All right, here we go. Hebrew midwives were told not to take the baby boys and to destroy them, and they didn't. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were told to bow down to an image of gold, and they said, look, we just can't. We have one God, and we're not going to bow down to that image of gold. So we have instances where if we are told to violate our relationship with God, then we honor God. Now, interestingly enough, when COVID first started, we didn't do any of this technology thing. And all of a sudden, COVID came along, and the government said to us, what about assemblies?
Keep them small or shut them down.
Don't do it. And so we said we needed to be obedient to the authorities, and we started doing it in that little room right over there, and that's when Burke became engaged with filming, and he's never stopped since. I think Burke has missed 2 or at the most 3 times since the beginning of COVID. And he's done so much for us. I look at the whole thing and think, God worked that for our good in this congregation, because there are a lot of people. Greg has relatives, brother and a sister who are able to watch. A cousin is able to watch. And I have people once in a while who are watching in different places that I find out about. So it's been really good for that. But there were some congregations of people who in that particular time said, we believe that they're making us choose between the law of man and the law of God, and they kept meeting. I can understand what they were saying. There is a famous preacher in California and they were submissive for a while, but California became more and more overbearing, and he said, John MacArthur said, no more. We're not doing any more. That was his conscience talking about, am I obeying God or obeying man? I understand all that. And I think we have the perfect right to try to determine that for ourselves. But most of the time, it has nothing to do with my relationship with God, the authorities. Everybody kind of see that? A lot of the times, I just don't like them. And I don't like their policies. And I don't like what they're trying to say to me. And I know I'm not supposed to get into politics, and I'm not into politics. I'm about to decide that in our nation's capital, whichever side of the aisle you might be on, there is enough corruption to go around. I'm really tired of the corruption on everywhere I turn. But there are certain policies right now and certain ideologies right now being promoted that I am just absolutely against. But there are agendas being pushed that are social agendas on how we view biblical things like identities and such as that do violate my relationship with God. They do. And I can say as a disciple or a follower of Jesus, I can choose to love everyone. But I don't necessarily choose to agree and accept that kind of behavior and approve of that kind of behavior. And I think that's my right. You shouldn't be able to tell me I have to do that. Or if I don't do that, I'm going to get fired. Or if I don't do that, I'm going to go to jail. Or if I don't do that, whatever. Does that make sense to you? So this becomes exceedingly personal as you and I deal with these things. Bring it down to a smaller level. Has anyone here ever disagreed with an eldership? Every one of us, every single one of us has disagreed with an eldership. At one time I had a battle because I thought that a group that was claiming to be an educational group decided all of a sudden they were going to offer bachelor's degrees, and they were going to do it because they said our students could do 4 years of work in 2 years. I said, nobody's that smart. None of them are that smart. And I said, besides that, according to the accreditation you're claiming, you don't have a single professor, maybe one, who is qualified under the accreditation principles. And I said to the eldership, so you're choosing to lie? You're choosing to promote lies? And now I wasn't mean about that, but I stood up and talked about that because I thought it was wrong. We have all had those situations where we disagree. And it's easy for me to look at someone else and say, wow, Cammie, you didn't handle that very well. You should have done this. Or I say, wow, Karen, you didn't, if I'd have been you, I'd done it this way. Well, the trouble is, I'm not you. And the trouble is, I'm not in that circumstance. So we need to be really, really careful how we judge. Okay? All I know is that I think he's saying, when you come into the kingdom, I want you to be so different that everyone can see it. So when it comes to how you live as a citizen in a country, I want you to be really different. And I want you to be careful how you talk about your leaders. I'm going to tell you, I could so easily right now start talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leaders who have prominence in this nation, and I can give you a tirade on them if I really tell you in my heart how I feel. But the scripture says, Ken, you're supposed to be more careful about that. Okay? sometimes I'm not as careful as I should be. Okay? But is everybody understanding this? Now, the interesting thing is, I have never been a true slave. I've never been a true slave. Because a true slave has few rights, and the only rights they have are granted to them by the master. They are bought and they are sold. They are property. And he says, now you who are slaves in that slavery world, I want you to be good slaves. And I want you to be obedient to your master. It's going to be easy when your master is good, but listen to what he says. Even when your master is harsh. Well, I don't like that idea. And we kind of take that framework and we kind of ease it over and say, well, that's kind of like being an employee with a boss. Well, it's kind of like it, but it's much more severe here. But I will tell you something. If you want to go back into the work world, and some of you have been out of the work world for a long time, you want to go back in the work world and watch how employees talk to their employers and to their supervisors, it is sometimes really, really ugly. It's really ugly. And they think they can say anything. Everybody understand this? But there is a principle of submission, and there's a principle of respecting authority. I was involved last Thursday night. It started. I was involved in that starting again early Friday morning. That lasted about 10 o'clock or 10:30 constantly. I got back involved in it at 8 o'clock the next morning. I continued with it all the way till at least noon. And then it cranked back up when I was sitting by Rob at a restaurant, and I had to finally tell him, Rob, I'm sorry, I've got to look at my phone because I'm dealing with this problem. It cranked back up then and lasted for another till 10 o'clock that night. And it involved friends of mine. But the thing that got me about it was it's involving how people treat authority and what people are saying about authority. And you got to be really careful about it. You got to be really careful how you talk about authority and how you conduct yourself around authority. Make any sense?
This particular verse 18 is not popular today. Because it says, oh, you see, Christians, they perfectly fine with slavery. Now, we know some of slavery in the Bible is voluntary. Some isn't. But people do not like, this is something they point to say, well, it's Peter here, but Paul says the same thing. He's like, but it's about being, in this passage from 18 to, it's basically you're being an example of Christ. Even if you're getting treated harshly, it's like and I know there's a lot of things where people, they don't like it. Christians are weaklings. Oh, you're supposed to just take it. Well, to a point anyway, yes.
Well, that was the culture in which this was set. There was a slavery culture. We have had a slavery culture in our country in our past. Was it right? No, it was not right. It was not right. But had we lived in 1840 in America, we probably would not have thought anything about it. It would have probably been a normal way of life. At the same time, I think I can show you a passage where it says, masters, how do you treat your slaves? You treat them really, really well. Now, watch as we move to chapter 3. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. Well, I'm going to have to tell you that there is an element of culture tied into that particular statement. There is an element of culture, and I can get really in trouble for saying that, but I'm not well-traveled. Zonell is really well-traveled. If you go to the Middle East, even to this day, predominantly, how are women treated? Property, is that pretty close?
Second class.
Second class, no rights, no say-so, and abused horribly in various ways. That's the culture. That's. And now we come along and we have America, and there was a time when women couldn't vote, right? But we moved beyond that, and now, did we not go through a time in our history when the culture was that all the women wore skirts everywhere? Did we not go through a time in our culture where 95% of the women were stay-at-home mothers and housekeepers? Did we not do that? And now we come to a time in our culture, and it's a high percentage of the wives and the mothers and the women are where? They're in the workplace. And they're not just doing secretarial work. They are attorneys, and they're medical doctors, and they're lawyers, and they're college presidents, and they're doing big jobs. Are they doing them well? Oh yeah, they're doing them really well. Things have changed drastically. Things have changed a lot. And yet there's still a principle here. There's an order of things that wives are supposed to be submissive to their husbands. I don't know how that applies today, but it's different. It's different. Does that mean that Sue's never opens her mouth and she does everything that I say to do and when to do it and how to do it and all that? Is that how this works at our house? No. It should be, but it doesn't work that way. I mean, you got to interpret this the way you think it should be. But that's not where we are. So there's something here that you have to use. Could I say the word common sense? Is there something about common sense that you read in these words and you kind of put it together and say, try to, you know what it really is talking about? Now listen to the next verse. You be submissive, you be good to your husband, so that if any of them do not believe, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, your beauty should not come from outward adorning, such as braided hair and the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Instead, it should be that of the inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. So it kind of reads to me like, I like to look nice, okay? I brought a new suit home today. I did bring a new suit home today. That they called me this week and said it was altered. I really like the suit. It'll make me look great. Well, if I can be made to look better, it'll make me look better, okay? Let's put it that way. I like to look nice. But I don't think God's paying a lot of attention to what I'm wearing. And I don't think He's paying a lot of attention to how much jewelry I have or don't have. He's paying a lot of attention to who I'm becoming on the inside. And so do you remember what I started telling our first grandchild when she was born? The very first time I held her, the very first time, I turned my back so nobody in that room could see or hear. And I said, you are beautiful on the outside, and you are beautiful on the inside, and the inside's what matters. And I've continued to say it until this day. We are an inside people. We're an inside kingdom. Is that making sense to anybody? So when I'm talking about being submissive as a citizen, it's an inside attitude. It's an inside position. And when I'm being submissive as a worker or even a slave, it's an inside deal. But when I'm a master, It's an inside deal. If you're the kind of master, if you're the kind of husband, if you're the kind of boss that is harsh and hard and mean and whatever, that's no good. It's no good. Everybody's got it, don't you? It's some of the hardest material that I know how to apply. Hard to understand in terms of how to apply. The last 2 weeks on Sunday mornings, what should have been the easiest material in the world, I've told the story of Nicodemus so many times I can quote it, and then I start trying to preach it and think, I don't know this story. I don't know how this fits. I don't know what it means. It's deeper than what I understand, how I look at it. It's big time stuff.